They don't relate to one another, but they play off against one another, the images. I'm really fundamentally an image maker, and I think that these images play off one against the other. I stop at 3, yes. Well, 4 seems too many. You go on forever. I mean, you go on like a Mickey Mouse forever then. You know, I've done ones with just 2, but I prefer the 3. It may be also to do with the balance seems better with 3.
Francis Bacon was born in 1909, left home at 16, drifted in Paris and Berlin in the late 1920s, and came back to London as an interior decorator. He became a painter after seeing an exhibition in Paris and made a few works before the Second World War. Most of these he destroyed. In 1944, he made his first triptych, Studies for Figures at the Base of a Crucifixion.
I think that those 3 were influenced by the things that Picasso did between 1926 and 1932, when he did them both in Dinard and in Cannes. And I think that those were influenced, but I think they have a different atmosphere. His are more happy, more playful, you may say, than these are. I found an old book in Paris on diseases of the mouth, and they were hand-coloured plates of these different diseases of the mouth. And they always interest me, and the colours were beautiful. And that's the reason I like the mouth. People read things into everything, and they always say that mouths have a strong sexual influence. They probably do. I was going to do a whole crucifixion in those days. I have no religious feelings, but at the same time, I was going to do a crucifixion and put these around the base of it. And I didn't go on doing the crucifixion. Only reason I ever used the crucifixion because it was an armature on which I could kind of hang certain sensations. But very soon I gave it up because I found I could do the same thing better without using the crucifixion.
Bacon did not make another triptych until 1962. In the intervening period, he painted the works that are most frequently associated with him, the popes, based on the Velázquez portrait of Pope Innocent X. He also did portraits of some of his close friends. This one is of Isabel Rawstorn, and of himself.
This one here, which is in the Guggenheim, was the first big triptych I ever did. This last panel, the right-hand panel, to some extent, I'd always been a tremendous admirer of the Cimabue that was in Florence, of the Christ on the cross, which even when it's destroyed, still looks a magnificent image. I did turn the image upside down. It's not really like it, but I know it to some extent it was influenced by that. There's somebody shot about on a bed. No, I didn't, from a photograph, I just did it. The thing is that, well, you know very well if you go into a butcher shop that the colour of the meat is beautiful, and that's the reason I think I've used meat is for the colour. I remember I used to very often go into Harrods, which had a magnificent butcher's. It was a sort of hall of meat. And sometimes I was supposed to decorate the meat or something. They used to put a rosette on the leg of lamb or something like that, so I thought I'd put a little rosette onto that. I had to put something red, and I think like a kind of rivet around the arm. I just put a red armband. It seemed easy and simple to put the swastika on it as well. I take everything from everybody and everything I possibly can take, and I think all artists always have done so. I mean, it's not cricket, is it? There are no rules to the game in painting. You should steal from anybody, anything that will help you. I don't know, I was thinking of horses' legs then, but I may have been, as my father was a trainer of racehorses, and one very often saw the bandage, but I wasn't conscious of it being from that, but it may have been.
Many of Bacon's figures are set against a curved background. This has the effect of presenting them as if on a stage.
My grandmother, she had a house which the back of it was curved. So the inside rooms of that part, the back part of the house, were all curved. So that may have had a lingering effect, I don't know. There was a great fuss about buying that one because of this man on the, well, it's not really a lavatory, it's the bidet, isn't it, that they always have in French bathrooms. You know, there's a pastel of Degas in the National Gallery of a woman sponging her back, and you see at the top of the spine is actually almost breaking through the skin. It may have influenced me in that, I don't know. It's a picture I've always admired very much, the Degas. I only paint people I know very well, you see. I know the contour of their face. I do have photographs of them, but as you see, these are not really photographic paintings at all. I just use the photographs as people used to use models, only they used them much more literally than I use photographs. John Deakin took a lot of photographs for me. I have an enormous number of them somewhere, but they're not really very useful, beyond being references to, you know, just the way the face is made to some extent.
So, does he ever have the person he is painting in the studio?
I would hate to have them there, because they would disturb all the deformations. I always hope, for instance, in portraits, to deform them back into appearance. But how often does that happen? There's no point in doing a portrait of somebody unless it looks like them. I haven't a clear view at all. I have an overall feeling of what I want to do. I thought of those ones there. I thought of doing them as of three figures seen from the back. And so I just made them, well, I think one of them shaving. I think they're both shaving more or less, or I don't know what they're doing, or reading. But I just wanted to use the back. But how they come about, how the images come about, I just simply don't know. You see, I generally paint with brushes that people use. I don't use what is called artist brushes very much. I generally use those brushes that you paint the wall with. And so that they're very often very loaded. I mean, my things, I always want my things to look immaculate, but I want them to come about in a very arbitrary and rough way. You see, painting is such a very fluid medium that if you're using large brushes, and if you put paint on the canvas, and if you turn a brush one way or another, it has a different implication. And you use the implication which is the nearest to your nervous system. I don't know what I'm doing, really. Don't think that when I'm saying this, I'm suggesting that I'm a genius or anything like that. All I do just happens to be the way I work, you see. And I don't know what I'm doing, but I have an overall sensation before I start the things. When people talk about inspiration, I never think, I just think that inspiration comes from work. I mean, I dare say there are people who are very inspired, but I don't think it applies to me. I just work and hope chance is going to really work for me that day. Well, I love mirrors. I mean, I like seeing people. I like seeing mirrors, but I've never really. I don't know if I've done it ever successfully, but there it is.
During the 1950s, Bacon had made several paintings of two figures on a bed. His source was a series of photographs by Edward Muybridge, who worked in Philadelphia. Muybridge was a pioneer of the photography of movement.
After all, he did these remarkable series of figures in movement, and of course, you know, even Degas subscribed to Muybridge, an enormous number of artists of that time, because they were so interested in seeing these images in movement, and especially of the animals. There's a very remarkable series in his thing of wrestlers. And I think to some extent that these figures together came originally, probably was suggested by these wrestling figures of Muybridge. The circles were made. I had a dustbin lid, which was just fitted beautifully, and I put a lot of black paint around that and stuck the dustbin lid on, and that made the circle.
Bacon's work has always been dominated by images of his friends. From 1964, George Dyer was a close friend of Bacon's and was portrayed in many of his paintings. George Dyer died in 1971, and Bacon embarked on a series of triptychs in remembrance of him.
He's in that one, but I did that also after he died, and the centre one is of him unlocking the door, you know, of the house he lived in.
It has been suggested that the central panel was in part inspired by T.S. Eliot's lines, "At the first turning of the second stair, I turned and saw below the same shape twisted on the banister, under the vapour in the fetid air, struggling with the devil of the stairs, who wears the deceitful face of hope and of despair." Bacon denies this.
You see, I just happened to have been reading some poems of Eliot at that time, because I liked reading poetry because everything is said so quickly, and I can't, you know, they take so long in novels, whereas in a poem, there it is. It's very often been said that modern man wants a sensation without the boredom of its conveyance. And of course one hopes to make the things as near to shorthand as possible.
second triptych in the series was painted in August of the following year, 1972.
I had an overall idea that I wanted to make two figures and two figures together in the middle of the thing. And then I just started, I put them on that one chair, and I thought, well, I'll put this thing, I'll make his shadow in the same colour as the flesh. I thought, well, why always make the shadows black? I'll just make them as part of the body and make them as though the shadow were part, so the shadow fell like part of the flesh rather than being a dark shadow, as is the usual way of making them. I used to see things in that way. I used to see things emerging from, I daydream, and in my daydreams I could see masses of flesh out of which every so often images emerged. The whole thing, if you can bring it to, if it works, is a sheer accident. This one, for instance, that you have in the Tate Gallery, that centre panel, those two images just came around by accident, really. I mean, one's always frustrated that you never really arrive at what you really... They're never good enough. And the thing is that there is another side to when I talk about accident. I mean, we have a whole sea, you may call it, of what we call the unconscious, which every so often, for some reason or other, images emerge that you don't know anything about from it, and you can then begin to use them. That is a form of accident to me. This is the only one that may have some story. When I had the show in Paris at the Grand Palais, this friend of mine insisted on coming over, and we were staying in the same hotel, and he committed suicide. I came back in the evening, and the man in the hotel said to me, I've got something horrible to tell you. Your friend's committed suicide. Well, I said, where is he? He said, well, he says in the mortuary now. Well, anyhow, the thing was, he was found, he'd vomited into the basin, and he was found dead sitting on the lavatory. And this, you could say, was, as it were, passing from being sick in the basin to going to the lavatory. And that's the only one that I could say has any really story to it at all. I didn't think of it. I just put that shadow in. It's entirely, you could put it as an aesthetic thing. I mean, I didn't think of it in that way. A figure wouldn't make that shadow, would it? I mean, I don't know. It's really a formal shadow.
Throughout his life, Bacon has used images from the dramas of Aeschylus, particularly the Agamemnon. The influence was apparent to him even in the first triptych.
Well, this first triptych, what comes really, insofar as my things have any meaning at all, this comes from the Furies in the Oresteia of Aeschylus. Well, nobody likes this triptych, but this is the figure that I'm most pleased with of all my figures, because you don't really know whether it's one figure or two figures. And I think it's got an ambiguity which a lot of the figures haven't got. And that particular one, I don't say the whole triptych, but that particular figure is one of the figures that I like most of all. I mean, I know they're very interlocked, and you wouldn't perhaps know it was two, but I always think it's of them as two figures.
Bacon's version of the Furies is developed in a number of paintings, and its origin is said to be a photograph which he had in his studio of a bird taking off. The birds appear again in the triptych of 1976, when the sense of menace and anxiety gathers momentum.
And I don't really know what it's about. The only thing I can say is that those two figures at the back are in fact very enlarged heads of Peter Beard. I only can say that I suppose the centre ones also have, in some sense, those images have something to do with the furies that come out of the Orostar. Because after all, we do live by all the hidden areas of our makeup. After all, we don't know what the unconscious is, but we do know that many things that we do and think come from instinct, and instinct generally arises from, you could say, from that whole unconscious sea which is in all of us.
Bacon's realization of the Furies is seen at its most complete in this triptych of 1981.
That image comes from, as you know, from the Orostar. At least that's how it came up to me. It's not an illustration of the Orostar, and that is the blood under the door. After Clytemnestra had murdered Agamemnon, you could read it that way if you like. But I don't read it that way. I just put blood running under a door. how could I be more frightening than if you hear the news each day or anything that's happening, go out in the street and see what's happening or anything. I mean, how could I compete with that? No, I'm certainly not trying to do that. I mean, take one of the great phrases from Aeschylus, the reek of human blood smiles out at me. Well, that suggests a million different kinds of images.